My name is Eshwar Sundaresan. I am a writer based out of Bangalore and a third generation Mumbaikar. The first novel that I have written is slated for a release in February 2003. February 2013. Westland is the publisher, and the title of the novel is Behind the Silicon Mask. Essentially, the book is set in the city of Milwaukee, which is in the American Midwest, and it's designed to be a thriller, a page turner. There are two elements of uncertainty in the book. One is that a super snowstorm is blowing through the city of Milwaukee, and also a serial killer who is targeting immigrants is on the loose. As the book begins, a very nosy television journalist breaks the news that around 200 Indian IT software professionals are located in downtown Milwaukee, and they work for a particular Fortune 500 company. And the moment this news is released, of course, it's like telling the serial killer that your targets are here, come and get them. So immediately the police department swings into action and tries to protect these immigrant workers. And at the same time, the serial killer has heard the news as well, and now he is going after them. So essentially, as the plot moves forward, we come to familiarize ourselves with the world of the Indian IT professional in an on-site location. We come to know what he goes through on a daily basis. See, essentially, this industry has been glamorized quite a bit, and a lot of people who are outside, who are not very aware of what happens to IT professionals, look at them with a bit of envy and awe. But I'm looking at them as human beings who are prone to the same kind of breakdowns, the same kind of emotional turmoil, and essentially that's one of the motives of the book, to try and demystify the industry, as it were. And as far as I'm concerned, the serial killer provides immediacy to the plot, and it helps the reader move on. But for me, the book is not about that. The book is about existentialism. It's about this generation of Indians who grew up, who did their schooling in the pre-liberalization era, came out and became part of the workforce in a very different kind of economy, and saw their lives transform in a matter of a few years. And then, having satisfied a lot of the needs that their parents could not take for granted, now these people started asking themselves, what do I do now? How do I go up Maslow's hierarchy of needs? What about my self-actualization? Things like that. Those things became important. And of course, there is a huge struggle. Having lived all your life trying to sustain yourself and achieve a comfortable life, now you're at a crossroads. You have achieved those goals. Now, what new goals do you set for yourself? How do you look at yourself? What do you really want to do in life? So, those aspects of the book are dealt with through the primary protagonist in my book, whose name is Parthosanautobiographical. Certainly, I have a day job in the IT industry. I work for a very reputed company, and I was based on site in the city of Milwaukee, and I lived and worked in downtown Milwaukee, which is a very picturesque, unique location. So actually, recreating the setting for my story was not that much of a challenge. However, my proximity to the industry was a challenge when I was writing this book, in the sense that I was too close to the subject for me to see it objectively and with compassion. I was sometimes getting too bogged down in the details that may not interest the lay reader. So the initial few drafts of the book were far more technical than the final product. And now, although the book deals with Indian IT professionals, I've ensured that the industry itself stays as a backdrop. It does not overwhelm the reader. Only sufficient technical details are revealed that are important to the plot and the narrative. Parthosan is an extremely complex character. He is aware that he has got a dual personality, In fact, I keep coming back to this theme again and again. So there is a Peter Parker side of Parthosan and a Spider-Man part. And most of the people are able to glimpse only at the Spider-Man part of Parthosan, the problem-solving guy, the superhero who comes, arrives in a crisis and diffuses the situation. Whereas Peter Parker is completely hidden, and his motivations are seldom inspected by he himself. And not just Partho, other characters in the book also have their own very human dilemmas that they face on a daily basis. So that's what the story is about. It is not about technology, and it is certainly not about trying to glorify the era that we live in. The era itself is a reality. It is dealt with as such. Well, that's a very good question, and I'm still not certain about the answer, frankly. There are elements to Parthosan's character that I see in myself, but he is certainly not an autobiographical character. I am unlike Parthosan in a lot of ways. But coming back to the other question about the other situations that are happening, the other characters, things happen in your life, and most writers use their life as raw material for their literature. The challenge always is to figure out what is distinctive and interesting for every reader. How do you not generalize? How do you ensure that whatever you're creating is original? It might be inspired, but is still original. And so all that has happened. I have looked at my own experiences, but I have made sure that everything is crafted. There are inspirations peppered throughout the book, but none of the experiences narrated in the book is verbatim. Oh, I knew at the age of 8 that I wanted to be a writer. I was 8 years old when I wrote my first short story at home. And the moment I finished writing that story, I knew that I wanted to be a writer. It's just that I come from a certain background and I had certain responsibilities towards my family. I wanted to make sure that I fulfilled all those responsibilities before I started embarking on my own journey. So what probably should have started at the age of 12, for me started at the age of 27. And I consider those 15 years well spent, because having put a strong foundation to life, I could now concentrate on this extremely exhilarating journey of creativity. I am a full-time writer since 2003. In this book has taken 10 years of my life. I have rewritten it 14 times, and if you look at the first version and the final one that's going to print, you will see absolutely no similarities except for the characters. The plot has changed, the narrative has changed. I have grown as a writer, so only the central idea has remained exactly the same for 10 years. But as I evolved, this work has evolved as well. And in this duration, I've also written a lot of other books. And in fact, the sequel to this book is already ready, and I hope to see it in print very soon. There are other works that are in different stages of completion. So this 10 years has been a kind of a hibernation for me. But I was not sleeping, I was producing, and I hope that in the next couple of years I will be able to come out with a series of work and get feedback from my readers, so that I know what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. Well, I think this idea is an integral part of most works of literature. If you are describing a human being in depth, then you will, as a writer, be forced to describe his vulnerabilities, his frailties. And that is where beauty lies, in knowing a character so deeply and knowing all his flaws and still being able to love that character. And that's one of the goals of a good writer, to ensure that he is able to portray a human being in its entirety, which will necessarily require portraying his vulnerabilities? Certainly the second, uh, because firstly, as a writer, when you start off with a blank page, you really don't know where you're going. You're discovering as much about the story as the readers as they're reading the book. You have a general idea, you know what you want to say in the book. So your subconscious already has some base software, operating system software, if I may call it so. And then as you build the story, the software develops, and then you become clearer about what you want to say. And I personally become extremely anxious if at some point in time my character does not rebel against me. If my character is not rebelling, if my character is silent and is looking for me for instructions, then I know that he is not yet fully alive, he is not completely developed. But the day he says, stop, I won't do that, what are you asking me to do? Then I say, now this character is alive and kicking, and now I let the character take over. Which doesn't mean that, I completely lose control over the narrative. It doesn't mean that. It just means that there is a part of my brain which has assumed the characteristics of the character, and now that part of the brain is dictating what the character is going to do. And for me, that's crucial, that all my characters must have strong voices inside my head, and they must debate, they must actively debate inside my head. In fact, when I'm in the middle of writing a novel and I shut myself off from the world, and people ask me, how can you just tolerate your own solitude for such a long time? I said, solitude? What are you talking about? There is a cacophony going on inside my head. There's no solitude whatsoever. I think there have been a few short stories, 3 or 4 I wrote with the ending in mind. So the story began with the ending in mind. But in most cases, no, I am not aware of the ending. I don't know what's going to happen. And that's part of the excitement, because as I'm reaching the climax, I'm so excited to know what's going to happen next that I put in more effort, and the enthusiasm shows in the work. And if as you're reaching the end of the book and as a writer you are not able to muster enthusiasm, then you're going to force yourself. You're either going to force yourself into creating an artificial ending, or you're going to paint yourself into a corner. One of these two things could happen. So yeah, I try not to think of the ending at all when I start a book. Yes, the two formats are very different from each other. Each comes with their own set of challenges. In a short story, it is all about brevity. How do you narrate a substantial tale within 3,000 words? And those 3,000 words must take care of character development, plot, it should intrigue the reader, and in the end, it should not look like a mint that you have at the end of a dinner. It should also give you the feeling of having had some food, having had a meal. That's the challenge of the short story. The novel's challenge is that you need to sustain the quality of writing, and you need to create an in-depth world for the reader. So you're given sufficient time now. You create the character, add dimensions of complexity to him. You create intriguing situations. You're given the space to do it. Now the challenge is to fill that space and fill it in the most interesting manner possible. Oh, that's a very good question. Sometimes I have surprised myself. For instance, there is this particular book that I've written called Peepoo Dry. I hope to see this in print next year. It's a satire set in colonial India in a fictional town called Peepur. And the plot of that book is quite simple. The white rulers of the town, the Britishers, run out of whiskey. And in the absence of alcohol, they do bizarre things. They lose control of the town and the situation. So this was the plot. When I began it, I thought it's going to be a short story. Then I ended the first chapter and said, okay, the first chapter is over. And then I caught myself saying, first chapter? So is this not a short story? Then I realized it's not a short story, and it turned out to be a novella. It was not a full-length novel, but a novella nonetheless. So yes, that's again a problem. If you are so certain about everything, about the format, about the length, about the story, I don't know how you can produce literature. I'm not that kind of a writer. Maybe there are some people gifted enough to produce interesting literature in that way. For me, the whole thing is a journey in self-discovery. Well, it's a page turner. I have had feedback from dozens of people so far. I'm very excited about how this book is going to do. It has, most people have reverted back to me within 24 hours saying they couldn't put it down. And it's very satisfying as a writer to have that kind of an impact on a reader, because that's what you try to achieve, right? You try to tell a good tale. That should be the primary objective of a writer. And if you are also able to address the human condition and leave that person with some deeper messages, then fantastic. But that deeper message cannot be left at the cost of a good story. So I always try to tell a engaging story through all my works. And there is one more very interesting aspect of about this book, Behind the Silicon Mask. We are very familiar with works of diaspora, Indians going to America, and the loneliness and the sense of alienation and all of that follows such a move. This is not a diaspora book, this is a crossover book. Half of my characters are American. The setting is completely American. My protagonists are Indian. So this book belongs as much to India as to North America. And I can so easily visualize an American book reader picking this up and reading it not as an Indian book, but as an international book. And that's what I'm hoping for.